It is Wednesday, January 27th, 2021, 6:35 p.m., and I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This is a workshop session between the Board of Selectmen and Strategic Land Ventures regarding 40B development proposed at Shingle Hill. This is going to be first of a series of negotiation sessions to see if the town can come to an agreement for a LIP for the project. So before we get started, a couple of opening comments. This stage of the project, the Board of Selectmen is being asked to see if it can come to an agreement with the developer to provide a letter of endorsement with a set of conditions for the project, at which point the developer would go and get a certificate of eligibility and come back to the zoning board for with a comprehensive permit application. The zoning board would then work on the permit application with the developer to establish the details of the project. At this stage of the project, the Board of Selectmen is being asked only to provide that letter of endorsement. The role of the Board of Selectmen is not to reject the project, and we don't actually have that power. This is a 40B development. The developer can move forward with this project either by going through us or not, and will eventually arrive at the Zoning Board of Appeals. So the objective for the Board of Selectmen is to look at this project as if it's going to proceed and see if we can develop a set of conditions under which we would support it moving forward. So that's the phase of the process that we're in. This will be the first of some meetings between us and the developer to see if we can reach an agreement in that respect. I will comment that we have received a petition last night from a series of residents asking us to delay these negotiations for a number of different reasons. Some of them are not really in our control, much as we would like them to be. So, for example, a desire to have substantial detail about the wastewater treatment plant or the wastewater treatment facility proposed for the site is not something that actually is going to and would be developed in detail until they were deep into the Zoning Board of Appeals phase of the project. So although we might like to have details such as that, we can't. This is not a normative process. It's a different process from a regular development. This is governed by the state rules of 40B applications, and there's a whole bunch of information that simply is not available and will not be available upon which to base decisions. So the Board of Selectmen will try to take that into consideration and develop conditions that we think will best protect the town's interests if we come to an agreement with the developer. So that said, over the past several weeks, the board has been working with consultants, with other boards in town, to develop a draft set of conditions that we can discuss with the developer. And we have sent a draft of those conditions out. They are actually on the website now, on the town's 40B website. The developer got them yesterday and responded to them. And we're going to discuss some segment of those conditions tonight. And what I'm going to do is the conditions are broken into four main areas: fiscal, environmental, traffic, and other. And I think the goal tonight is for us to work our way through the fiscal impact section of this set of conditions. And see how to proceed with our next meetings. There's a bunch of information in here that we will need to research to give to the developer and vice versa. So with that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and, I'm sorry, procedurally, the way this is going to work. I'm going to go through the list of conditions that we're going to be talking about tonight. We'll discuss them with the developer. We're going to be going around with town staff and the developer back and forth between the Board of Selectmen. And at the end of this phase, I'm not going to put a specific time limit on it because I really don't know how long it's going to take for us to chew through these conditions. I will be expecting to allow some public comment up to about a half an hour worth of comments, which town staff, the Board of Selectmen, if the developer, if there are any directed to the developer, and developer chooses to answer, I'll allow that. About a half an hour at the end from the public. All right, so without further ado, the fiscal impacts conditions. The first condition that the Board of Selectmen would like to request the developer is to reduce the number of apartments. And hitherto, we'd not come up with a specific number, but the number that we're aiming for right now is 135. We also want to reduce the height to 3 more main floors where possible to reduce the overall visible impact of the building. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually read through the set of conditions, and then I'll go through some of the developer responses that we have so far. And then I'm going to ask the developer, Jeff Engler, to respond. So the second condition was to maintain the same proportions of the 3, 2, 1, and 1+ bedroom units as in the original proposal. And Mr. Engler, we will have a question on this at some point. Third, preclude any future additions or expansions. Fourth, provide a local preference of 70% of the affordable units. Fifth, reduce to 60% of AMI for half the affordable units. Now, I will say that at a subsequent meeting, the Board of Selectmen would prefer that number be all. I understand that there's going to be some discussion around this. 6, pay for the water main extension along School Street across Route 128 overpass to the site. 7, developer to pay for all the individual unit water meters. 8, pay for all professional fees and expenses incurred by the town for engineers, architects, landscape architects, financial consultants, including CPAs, lawyers, hydrologists, hydrogeologists, and wetland scientists. 9, pay one-time contributions towards capital needs. Item A, $500,000 towards the purchase of new ladder truck, and actually we are broadening that to simply fire equipment. 5, $500,000 to the CPC Land Conservation Fund.
Want the developer to pay all this money?
C, $500,000 towards the turf field project. I'm going to ask folks who are not on the Board of Selectmen to please mute yourselves. I can go ahead and mute you as well. And if I get background noise, like this. All right. So those were the conditions that we had under fiscal impacts. Actually, Mr. Engler, I'll give you a choice here. I can either just read through your responses or let you respond to these yourself individually. The developer sent us a list of his initial responses to where they could provide them late around 1 o'clock this afternoon. What's your choice, Mr. Engler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I defer to you. I mean, I wrote these in somewhat of a narrative form or conversational form, I should say. So if you want to read them, a few of them I don't know that you need to read because, we've agreed to some of them already, and some of them are a little bit more nuanced. It's really up to you. I don't have more to add other than what we wrote at this point. I would just ask the board to recognize we received this yesterday at 11, and we made our best effort, to try to make this a productive conversation to get you something this afternoon. But some of these, could stand to be fleshed out a little bit more, which we would expect to do, over the next week or two. So really, Mr. Chairman, it's up to you. You could read my response. I could read my response, whatever the board thinks would be most effective.
Well, why don't I go ahead and just read them since I have them right here. And I think it would be beneficial to our public audience.
Mr. Chairman, maybe before you do that, I'll make one kind of, general comment that I think relates to several of these items.
That's fine.
Is we can't just eliminate units and pay all this mitigation and, what we called footnote 1 or 2 relative to, the Mass Works grant and municipal sewer. We just can't, those are just, financial non-starters for us. So with that said, I think optimistically, there's some sort of combination of the town, addressing some of those, we being able to address some of the town's concerns. The 135 is, density target. That's the first I've heard of that is tonight. So all of those things kind of tie together. They're not necessarily discrete. In other words, if we had the full density, we would have more money to pay mitigation. If you're asking us to lose 22 units, we're going to have a lot less money for mitigation, if any. And if you're asking us to lose, units with none of the other things that we asked for at the end relative to things we're asking the town to do that we really don't think have a negative financial impact. So I guess what I'm saying is those things are tied together, and how they end up kind of ruminating and being discussed will impact all of it, if that makes sense. So
Sure. We definitely understand that. All right. Why don't we get started with the responses? So under item number 1, reducing the number of apartments. So the response is the applicant will investigate the following. A, eliminating the 4th residential without the loss of units, effectively changing the footprint of the building and fitting the same number of units across 3 residential levels. B, eliminating part of the 4th floor, likely resulting in the loss of between 10 and 22 units. The applicant will not eliminate the current version of the 4th floor and the 41 units represented on the current plan set. The scope and amount of units to be eliminated in scenario B would be dictated by the town's ability to satisfy the conditions enumerated in footnote number 1 and number 2. And I'll come back to those later because they're referenced multiple times. Likewise, if the applicant is able to maintain a consistent density of, parenthetically, 150 plus or minus units across 3 floors, and the town satisfies the conditions in footnote 1 and or number 2, then the applicant will commit to the additional mitigation identified by the town in section number 9A and 9C. Okay. Item number 2, maintaining the same proportions of 3211 bedroom units. Now I'll come back to the response. Should the applicant eventually agree to a density reduction under any scenario within the structure of a development agreement, the applicant would undertake the best efforts to maintain the same proportionality of bedroom styles as represented in the current proposal. But depending on changes to the building, an exact proportionality could be challenging. The applicant recognizes that there were a density reduction effectuated, the applicant would then not make dramatic changes to the unit mix, e.g. converting lots of 1 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms. That would not be the intent nor in the spirit of the agreement. But the applicant cannot agree to exact proportionality until further reviewing the design. Moreover, the development agreement would need to be structured or written in such a way that these redesigns would be a condition to submit and as part of the comprehensive permit application, as we are not going to redesign the building and then learn that we can reach a deal with the BOS.
Mr. Chairman, that should be we can't reach a deal, not we can. I'm sorry.
I see. Yep. If we have an agreed upon development agreement, we can make future submissions conditional on us satisfying the proportionality concern. 3, under precluding any future additions or expansions, the response is agreed. 4, provide a local preference to the 70% of the affordable units. Response is the applicant will work with the town to satisfy this request and feel comfortable the local preference condition can be achieved. Per DHCD regulations, the municipality, not the applicant, has to demonstrate a need for local preference. This is not a high hurdle based on the applicant's and its consultant's experiences. We would instruct our affordable housing lottery agent to work with a designated municipal representative to prepare that demonstration of need, which according to the regulations needs to be submitted to the town by the town to SHCD shortly after the issuance of a final and recordable comprehensive permit decision. Under the 60% AMI for half or all of the affordable units, response, the applicant cannot agree to this request. On a capitalized basis, that affordable rent decrease right down would be about $85,000 per unit. The applicant can provide the financial analysis which supports this assertion. As 60% rents are not required under the 60B program, we're not willing to make this commitment, particularly in lieu of other Board of Selectmen requests. 6, pay for the water main extension along School Street across 128 overpass to the site. Response, agreed. Please see footnote number 1. 7, pay for the individual unit water meters. Response, agreed. 8, paying for all professional fees. Response, the applicant per 40B requirements commits to pay for all the retained professionals during the comprehensive permit public hearing process. That's the process under the ZBA. Moreover, should a development agreement be successfully executed, the applicant also agrees to pay for physical peer review and traffic peer review conducted to date. The applicant would consider paying for Mr. Witten's services, not CPA work, as we have never heard of that being required under a 40B, if a development agreement is successfully executed and that fee is capped at a reasonable total consistent with what is customarily paid to municipal 40B consultants and advisors. The applicant would also ask for the town to identify a cap for the fees, as a blank checkbook for municipal permitting fees will make pre-development financing and investment extremely challenging. And under item 9, for $500,000 toward the purchase of a new ladder truck or fire equipment. Response, the applicant could agree to this contribution, but only if footnote 1 and 2 are satisfied and based on the number of units the town would want the applicant to remove. Payment would be made prior to the first certificate of occupancy. B, $500,000 of the CP Land Conservation Fund. Response, the applicant will agree to this contribution, but only if the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust agrees to support this application and agrees to no future litigation. Otherwise, the applicant will not agree to any financial contributions to conservation land initiatives at this time. C, $500,000 towards the turf field project. Response, 40B case law is clear that a municipality cannot ask for mitigation that has no relationship to the pending 40B application. And this request clearly falls within that category. However, the applicant would commit to this financial request if the town satisfies both footnote 1 and 2, and based on the number of units the town would want removed from the program. And now I'm going to go hit the footnotes because those are going to be highly relevant. Footnote 1, the town will direct its planning and DPW departments to work with the applicant to prepare a MassWorks grant. This grant would go to offset the costs associated with the applicant designing and constructing an 8-inch water line to the proposed development site. The grant would also be used to offset costs associated with the infrastructure costs associated with bringing the municipal sewer to the site. The MassWorks Infrastructure Program is a competitive grant program that provides the largest and most flexible source of capital funds to municipalities and other eligible public entities primarily for public infrastructure projects that support and accelerate housing production, spur private development, and create jobs throughout the Commonwealth. The MassWorks grant will ask for the maximum possible award based on the size and the scope of the work proposed. Should the applicant receive $1 million or more as part of the grant, the total cost of the infrastructure program is likely going to be $3 to $6 million. Then the applicant will be committed to some combination of density reduction and/or mitigation payments highlighted in item number 9. A grant may likely be awarded after the applicant has concluded the comprehensive permit public hearing process, in which case the applicant would be required to file a modification request with the Manchester ZBA inclusive of plans showing density reduction. The town has over 12 months from execution of a development agreement to submit and secure a MassWorks grant, but the applicant would need to know if the MassWorks grant is awarded prior to filing for a building permit, as the density reduction has significant ramifications, e.g. financing, preparing construction documents, etc. Footnote 2. The town and necessary municipal and elected officials will work with the Department of Environmental Protection to remove the DEP-issued current consent order on the town's municipal sewer system. Once the consent order is satisfied, the town will secure and petition the DEP to allow the applicant to tie into the existing municipal sewer system at the applicant's expense to deliver the necessary pipe infrastructure to the site. The town has already confirmed it has excess capacity and more than enough capacity to include anticipated flows from the proposed development at 157 units. The town will need to satisfy the condition within 12 months of execution of the program development agreement in order to effectuate the contemplated density reduction. The elimination of the consent order and the allowance for the applicant to tie into the municipal system would need to be confirmed by the time the applicant receives the comprehensive permit. Should the town successfully achieve this outcome, the applicant would be required to file a modification request with the Manchester ZBA, inclusive of plans showing the density reduction. Okay, so those are the comments under the fiscal impact section and the 2 footnotes. For some of our board members, that may have been the first time hearing them, because I did send it out to them around 1 o'clock this afternoon, and I know some of them have been at work today. All right, so let's talk. What I like to do is talk first, I think, about the number of units, since this is the first that you've heard the 135 number. Do you have any comment you'd like to make about that?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't realize. You're asking what my comment of 135 is?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a lot less than we would like to do, but once again, would I say it's a non-starter? No, I wouldn't. And I would say we could look at that, and we may even be able to do 135 units over 3 residential levels. Would have to roll up our sleeves, but it might be achievable. However, it ties also to, you know, what are the other mitigation asks, and is the town successful in helping defray some of our costs through the MassWorks grant. And let me just make it clear, relative to the MassWorks grant, we already have a consultant identified that would support that, and we would do most of the work, but the grant technically, or the application, has to come from the municipality. We can't submit it independently. So we would do most of the heavy lifting, but it just comes from the town. And then also, you know, the sewer, that issue. So Mr. Chairman, I would not dismiss 135 units out of hand, but I think it ties once again to some of the other things, you know, that are currently on the table. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Okay, well, I do have 1 or 2 questions about it, but let me talk briefly about the sewer aspect. So when this project was proposed, it was indicated that the intent was to do on-site septic. And the town has been proceeding under the assumption that you would be pursuing that model. We haven't put an awful lot of discussion into sewer and the impacts of sewer and the item around footnote 2. In the past, the town has been working for some years now to upgrade its sewer system to repair deficiencies in its sewer system. The consent decree that you mentioned is the result of long years of neglect, and in part in a tidal area wherein we were generating very large I&I influx and infiltration into the sewer system, which was causing us to overrun the plant's capacity. We put a lot of effort into mitigating those so that we could get the consent decree lifted. And as part of that, some years ago, we put together at the behest of the state a comprehensive wastewater management program in which we indicated to the state moving forward that we were going to advocate for sort of a hybrid model, where in some cases we might extend sewer to some areas of town, and in other cases where possible, we would be working towards new septic systems or communal septic systems. And one of the advantages to communal septic systems is that instead of taking the water out of the water table and then shipping it a couple of miles offshore and dumping it, the fresh water from the treatment plant, we can actually return that water to the ground table. So there's some benefits to the town environmentally for having those communal septic systems. And it was the assumption that in part, that's what you're going to be doing here. So that's that item of the sewer and lifting the consent decree. That is a different approach and actually a fairly larger topic, and we're going to have to get back to you on that. That's going to require us to go back and have some discussions with.
Fair enough, Mr. Chairman. Let me just make it perfectly clear to the board. We're fully prepared to do an on-site system. We can get it permitted. We can design it. It can support our 157 units. That was always our intent. We would prefer to tie into a municipal system for a number of reasons, but we don't have to. So it's not like it has a benefit to us to tie in. If the town, for whatever reason, said we just can't do it, I mean, we're not going to fight you on that. We'll take that under advisement and we'll move forward with our treatment plant. And also, relative to one of the comments you made about the lack of detail, we can't even file with DEP for this permit until we have a comprehensive permit. They wouldn't even entertain the application. And we're not going to design a whole system until we know what we're designing it to. So obviously, you know, for people to ask us to design a whole treatment plant, when is that going to be 157 units? Is it going to be 145? Is it going to be 135? All has a dramatic impact on what we're going to design. So I think it's a little bit unfair or a misrepresentation to expect us to have designed a system that is still in flux based on, you know, a to be negotiated development. We certainly will at the right time, but not until we're through the permit process. So that's a long-winded way of saying we certainly intend and can do an on-site system, and we're going to move forward with that. And we need to, because if the town said, let's just say we're 6 months into it, and the town said, oh, I'm sorry, we tried and we just can't do it, we can't go back to the beginning. So our site plans will show the necessary leaching fields and all the infrastructure and everything else moving forward. But obviously all that goes away if we tie into the municipal system, because we don't need that infrastructure. So that's a little bit of context and background, Mr. Chairman, is we still intend to do the on-site system. It's just we would prefer tying into the municipal system if possible.
Okay. All right. Let me ask you a question about that 135 units versus the 157 units. So the calculations that we've done suggest that the 157 unit number is considerably above what the state's large project number is. And we wonder how you arrived at a number that appears to be larger than that large project number, and how you would address that if you were going for a comprehensive permit application outside of going through the town.
Well, and that's a good question, Mr. Chairman. And candidly, were we not to reach an agreement, we're going to do, we would not be able to do 157 units. We would have to do what is allowed under the large project cap, which is, I think, 135 units. However, the mix of units would change dramatically. We would have many more 2 bedrooms and 3 bedroom units. There's no limitation on the number of bedrooms in that large project cap. It's just total density. So the square footage would not change. In fact, the building theoretically could get larger if we did 135 units through mass housing. So I would ask the town to be aware of that I would not focus so much on the total number of units as the total number of bedrooms and the total, square footage, because were we to go to mass housing, our project will be as big or bigger than what we've currently proposed in terms of gross square footage and number of bedrooms. It would just have fewer units. So, but I acknowledge we cannot exceed that large project cap unless we do it on a friendly 40B basis.
All right. All right, at this point, I'm going to ask other board members if they have comments or questions right now on item 1.
So Eli, if I may,
Yes, Greg.
just a question to John Whitten, I guess. So if the board agrees to 157 and issues a letter of endorsement, it obviously still goes before the ZBA, and would they be bound by that? I mean, my understanding was that they are not.
So good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. No, that Greg is absolutely correct. The large project exception, which provides the Board of Appeals with an immunity from an appeal to the Housing Appeals Committee, the Board of Selectmen can't take that away. They're entitled to that card, so to speak. So, I think what Mr. Engler is saying is if there is a lip endorsement from the BOS, from the Board of Selectmen, that would carry a lot of weight with the Board of Appeals, and that they may not exercise, they may choose not to exercise their ability to say no or conditional approval with impunity. But Greg, you're absolutely right. The Board of Selectmen's negotiation pursuant to the lip can't remove the statutory and regulatory powers of the Board of Appeals.
Yeah, Mr. John, but I would say I'm not going to enter a development agreement with the Board of Selectmen that represents a certain number of units and us paying mitigation, and then get to the zoning board and have them take off 20 more units than what we just negotiated. So you can rest assured in the development agreement that the zoning board relative to density is gonna have, I don't want to say their hands tied, but they're going to have to, the project is going to be effectively consistent with what we're going to agree to if we reach a development agreement. Or if the zoning board, or we're going to write the development agreement that if the zoning board, reduces the density, then the commitments that we make are no longer in play. But you understand, I can't go forward under one pretense that I've reached a deal with the Board of Selectmen and committed to certain mitigation, and then the zoning board, for whatever reason, reduces density even further. That just doesn't make any sense. And if you were my counsel, you'd never allow me to agree to that.
Well, let me offer this, Mr. Chairman. I don't disagree with what Mr. English said, and I think the second to last comment is the one that would be universally true, which is the developer would caveat any agreement with the Board of Selectmen that if the Board of Appeals isn't consistent with that development agreement or lip endorsement, the developer reserves its rights to walk away. But there's no other way to do it. And I don't think any attorney listening on this call would disagree with me that the Board of Selectmen does not have the statutory power to limit or constrain the Board of Appeals. So I think we're saying the same thing, Mr. Engler. I don't think we're disagreeing with each other. What I'm adding is the Board of Selectmen lack the authority to constrain a municipal body that has statutory power. That doesn't mean you can't protect your rights should the Board of Appeals do something that you feel is inconsistent with the agreement. But those two are not mutually exclusive. They're both required. You may want one as a requirement, and I'm going to tell the board, both Board of Appeals and Board of Selectmen, that the Board of Selectmen don't have the authority to constrain the Board of Appeals in a comprehensive permit. They can make strong recommendations. They can enter into a development agreement with you. But at the end of the day, the regulatory power rests solely with the Board of Appeals. And we're not saying anything inconsistent with each other, but
Right.
these are separate issues.
Right, John, you're right. But the Board of Appeals would recognize, were they to do that, the whole development agreement and everything that was negotiated in advance and in good faith basically evaporates. So
That's exactly right. I agree with you there. And we have seen this has happened in thousands of circumstances across the country where you enter into an agreement with the executive, and then the adjudicative body either follows that consistently or doesn't, and then the deal with the executive falls apart. That's not uncommon, and that is just the welcome to how we deal with permitting in Massachusetts. It's very linear.
But that's very uncommon in my experience on LIP projects, John. I've never seen a zoning board dramatically change a project from what the one the Board of Selectmen endorsed.
I'm not saying, Mr. Engler, I'm not saying that they will. I'm just saying that we are speaking about different matters. The Board of Appeals has the authority to do what the Board of Appeals has to do. I'm not saying they'll do it. I'm not saying it's good policy for them to do it, but I'm saying that they can do it.
I agree.
All right. Can we, okay, if we move on to item number 2. Jeff, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was. I just have a quick question. Is the board more interested in the height of the building or the density of the building? Because those are two separate things. I could design a 10-story, 80-unit building that I imagine would be more impactful. I could also design a 3-story building that has 250 units. So I'm curious as to because listen, I don't expect the board or other people on the Zoom to agree with me, but practically speaking, in terms of its impacts, the difference between 157 units and 135 units is almost negligible in terms of traffic and other, stormwater management and the like. So I'm wondering whether, the height and going to 3 residentials is more important, or if the loss of units is more important. I understand if you got your cake and could eat it too, you'd want both, but I'm just curious as to which is more important, if I could ask.
Well, I think ultimately that needs to be answered in the context of the larger set of conditions. The height of the building is something that I know is rather important to the residential population. There are a number of people who are concerned about the visible impact of this. They're also very much concerned about the impact of that many units. I'm sure that there's many of them who are extremely concerned about even the impact of 135 units. As far as the board is concerned, we can certainly poll them. I don't know how useful that's going to be right now. I don't mind asking the board to go around expressing an opinion about the motivations around. Let's do it that way. Let's ask the board to express their understanding motivations around the height of the building.
Eli, before you do that, I'd like to say something.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
First of all, if you're going to call out on Jeff, you're going to have to specify which Jeff, because Mr. Engel, I think he just meant to call on me because I had been about to say something. But I understand.
Apologies.
No, it's an issue. You spell your name funny, that's okay. But we'll get by. Just Eli's going to need to designate which Jeff you're referring to. And my comment is, I recall a meeting that we had very early on in this process. Actually, it may not be very early on. It may have been up midway since your presentation at the end of October, in which you said to a comment about reducing the number of units, absolutely not. That will not happen. We design our projects with no extra units in them. This is the way that we design them. We will not reduce the units. I'm very surprised to hear you say I would entertain 135 units tonight, as if you had never made that earlier statement. So could you respond to that, please?
Sure. And it's a fair question, and my track record speaks for itself relative to what I've submitted and what I've gotten approved relative to going in with one thing and coming out with effectively the same thing. Over the course of, I mean, let's just say for discussion's sake, I made that comment 2 months ago, 3 months ago. I want to get a deal done with the board, and I recognize density reduction is important to that. So I've softened on my stance. There are some ways that it can not be as negatively financially impactful. And that density reduction also ties to the footnotes that I added at the end, specifically the MassWorks grant. If we can defray some of our capital expenditures with the grant, that obviously has a financial impact. So I have softened. We're in this like 5 or 6 months relative to our engagement on this. And, I'm willing to compromise to an extent to try to do something that the board can support and direct the zoning board to basically say, listen, we've worked in good faith with this applicant, and providing that they can meet all the regulatory requirements, this project gets the town to 10% and satisfies a big affordable housing need, et cetera, et cetera. So I've softened my stance contingent. If you just said 135 units and we want all this mitigation and we're not doing any of this other stuff, I would say no. But having the town's support does have value to me. So.
Okay, and I'm glad that it does. And I hope that we can work to some mutually advantageous agreement. The precision of language is really important to me and to the people of this town. You just said we've been at this for 5 or 6 months or 4 or 5 months. We've been at this for 3 months, less than 3 months. And there are people in town who feel like we're rushing. So we started on October 29th, and I count 3 months to today, January 27th. So let's be precise about the way that we talk, so that we don't exaggerate and cause a lot of distraction.
Well, respectfully, the first public hearing was scheduled a long time after I remember having discussions back in the summer. So ultimately, it doesn't matter. I mean, we're here now, okay? And the application has been submitted. The board has done good due diligence. You've hired good professionals. But I'm sure the board can appreciate that I don't have unlimited time. I can't just have this drag out and then have the board say, oh yeah, sorry, we're going in a different direction for whatever reason. So, we are where we are. I think I think the submittal of your asks and my response and Mr. Witten's involvement, I would hope in the next several weeks or so, we can frame out a development agreement. And if we can't, we can't, and that's okay too. And, both parties go in their different directions and the process goes on. So, but I can't have another 6 public hearings. I mean, in all candor, and I know every town has to do this differently, but this is true. The other lips I've done, it's basically town council, the planner or town manager or administrator, and a member of the board of selectmen or 2, depending on the size, in a room negotiating the development agreement. It's not done in public like this. And I respect the board's desire to do it this way. And every town has different protocols, and I totally get that. But it's not the most time effective approach. And I don't know that anybody would disagree with that. So.
Well, I agree you can do things a lot quicker that way. I also am pretty clear on what the outcome of that would be politically and personally for members of the board in this town. That would be, to say the least, unpopular. So we're going to go around the board a little bit on motivations regarding the height of the building. Jeff, did you have any comments on that?
Simply that this is one of the highest points with vistas in Manchester. And when you build 4 stories up on that high point, it's caused a lot of consternation among residents of the town, that it really has an impact on and changes the character of the town. And that may not mean anything to you, but it does mean things to the town and the people who are involved in negotiating this agreement with you. And so in terms of there's 2 words that are being used kind of interchangeably, density and number of units. And density is really the number of bedrooms. And when you start to throw out that, well, yeah, sure, I'll drop the number of units, but I'll increase the number of 3-bedroom units. That changes a lot of the things that we've been working with and trying to come to an understanding of the fiscal impact of this project. So if that's the way that you want to talk about this, that you'll drop units and increase density in the form of bedrooms.
I apologize, perhaps I if we're to reach a development agreement, I would not, the proportionality would be, I can't say it'll be exact, but it would be pretty darn close. What I'm saying is if I have to go in a different direction through a non-friendly 40B, the bedroom count will be significantly different. That's
you will propose a bedroom count that's significantly different.
Yes.
Okay.
But
That doesn't mean that the project will be built that way either.
Well,
So,
Well,
well, we're talking about two different things, but if, let's just say for discussion's sake, so we're clear, if we have a development agreement in place and the building ends up being 140 units or whatever, the proportionality that we have on our 147 unit building would be, if not exact, pretty close to 140 units, meaning, you know, predominantly more one bedrooms, you know, than other bedroom types.
okay.
I will represent that on the call, so.
But that's in terms of having both footnote 1 and footnote 2's.
Well, you know, I don't know. Those are some items I need to, you know, I just got this asked yesterday. So I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm
All
not
right.
sure.
all right. I yield the rest of my time, Mr. Chairman.
John Rand on the building height.
Yes, thanks, Eli, and yeah, thank you, Mr. Engler, for responding to these questions so quickly. From a height perspective, I tie that in a lot to the building design issue. And I do want that building to be lower, but I'm also interested in a roof line, and I'm also interested in what you can do to reduce the massing of the building. I'm not an architect, but I know there are lots of materials and other ways that you can make the building to look more livable and more characteristic of what Manchester is as a town. So, you know, the three floors isn't a hard and fast, but I know that if you have a variety of 3 floors and 4 floors and break things up, it makes things look more more compatible with Manchester. So that's my comment there. It was good to hear your comments about the proportionality. I'm a little bit concerned about that. And so long as I certainly want a reduction in the number of units, but as long as the proportion stays the same and we're not just going to keep a constant number of bedrooms, that's certainly something that I am in favor of. So I would certainly expect to see that proportionality kept regardless of where we end up with the unit count.
Understood.
Dan Harrison.
My concern is, I would like to see the a broken up roof line and massing so that it doesn't look like a giant shoebox with stripes on it. Not that there's anything wrong with shoeboxes or stripes. What concerns me is that the cost to the town is almost entirely on the number of children in the project. And I understand that it is a goal of the Commonwealth that we provide family housing, but the difference in the financial impact between what we asked for between 157 units and 120 units was very small. And the reason it was very small is that we assumed that the same proportions of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, and 3 bedroom would be continued. When you say that if you have to go to the ZBA, or as you said before, if you were reducing the number of units, then you would increase the number of bedrooms. So I think that we've agreed on a number of about 135 as many units as you can have and fit in the large project, under the large project limit. So I think that's where you're going to end up. I just don't want to see you end up there and adding, keeping the same number of bedrooms. And that's the part that's important.
Okay. I'm gonna go around the horn to Becky now, and then I'm gonna make a suggestion.
I would like to ask if Mr. Engler could clarify what the difference between a 1-bedroom and a 1+ bedroom is. And if,
Yeah, 1+ is like like a office with no windows, you know, no closet, like usually an office. It's just a
so
small room.
how do you differentiate then between numbers of 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and 1+ bedroom?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Our plans that we submitted differentiate between those based on the unit layouts that we've represented in our plans. So, you know, by code, rooms that are of certain size, that have a window, that have a closet, have to be, you know, designated as bedrooms. So, you know, that's by code. We can't, you know, that's just building code. So
Do you have to do a 1+? Can you just leave it a 3, 2, 1?
well, the 1+ is very attractive to the rental market that we're catering to. People like to have that additional office. You know, they don't want to have their, you know, desk in their bedroom or in the living room. So there's a real asset to us to, you know, have that a little additional space. Anybody that's ever lived in an apartment or a condo can attest to that. You know, having some of those additional nooks or whatnot matters. So that would have, or put a different way, if we had the same size 1-bedroom as a 1+ on square footage, we would rather have a 1+ because of that additional room rather than having an oversized family room or really big master bedrooms. It's just, you know, all our experience in this demographic and with this, you know, the marketing would indicate as much.
Okay, I'm looking at, you know, when you gave the first and second floor plans, the actual breakdown that you provide is for 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and 3-bedroom. But then if you were to look at the plans themselves, that's when you actually see where the 1+ is. And I'm actually very familiar with this because it's part of what my job is dealing with layouts of units like those. So, but that's of concern because people could very well use that as a bedroom, in which case we don't have a really good solid bead on what we may end up in terms of more students, or what we may end up with. And so to answer the question between height and number, it is, as Ann said, for me, bedroom density. I would love to see a reduced height that didn't then have the parking elevated. You know, it's as long as you're still keeping the parking at the same elevation, thereby actually reducing the height overall. I know you've got to make your numbers work for you, and I can appreciate that, but that's really not my driving concern.
Yeah, and we have let me just, and I don't want to get us sidetracked, but let me just throw out a theoretical. All right, let's say we had a 3rd floor building, but it had a pitched roof.
Mm-hmm.
The peak of that roof will be, you know, will have depth from the edge of the building. So it's not going to be the height, you know, right at the 4th floor. But we went through this in Winchester on one of my 2 projects where we transitioned from we had a peaked roof and we went to a flat roof, and that ended up taking off 14 feet of height. Now, if we're taking off a floor, but we're going to a peaked roof, what I'm telling you is I think as height is calculated by the Manchester zoning bylaws, our building might in fact be taller than what it is now. Now, with that said, there are architectural strategies and the peak of that roof is not, on the edge of the building. It's deeper into the building. But you get what I'm saying. So when people are like, well, we like the peak roof, I'm not telling you we wouldn't do that, but I would be disappointed if we try that and then people are like, oh my God, your building's tall. Well, yeah, you asked it to do a peak roof. So now
Well,
there's
that
other ways.
actually
There's
departs a
other ways,
little.
there's other architectural strategies we could do, maybe not a full peak, or we do some other things, or maybe just in certain areas that are, visible to School Street. But I'm just making people aware that, that's a possibility, because listen, I'm not wed to a flat roof. I mean, doing a peak roof is more expensive. But if that was critical to the town, we certainly can investigate that. But I just want people to be aware, how it manifests itself relative to massing and height. So,
Okay, I would just like to go back to the 2 points of, the density versus height. And while height is important, I personally am more concerned with density at this point. And there was one comment made earlier about the BOS instructing the ZBA, and I am not comfortable with that at all. That's not my job.
So I think I said I was going to make a suggestion. I'd like to, I guess I'll try to clarify a couple of points. So Mr. Engler, when we've gone through some of our financial discussions, one of the big factors with respect to whether or not there's an adverse financial impact of towns surrounds the ratio, the proportions of 3-2 and 1 bedrooms. And the brief fiscal analysis that we've done so far with our consultant and the financial data that you provided tends to suggest that it would be close to a financial wash or a little bit positive for the town at the current proposed proportions. And if those proportions change significantly, that may not be the case. And at which point the town has a different, we have decisions to make about whether or not we could support that. Obviously, a lot of our residential population is pretty concerned about the possibility that there'll be a negative financial impact of this development. So here's what I'd like to suggest. You've told us now that at 157 units, the ratios that you proposed here in this project would hold. You said that if you were going to go with 135 units, not under a lip, that those ratios would probably change the unit configuration. What I would like to suggest is that you tell us what those unit configurations are. Obviously, you're not going to do that tonight. And then we can look at what the impact of that would be. Because we've been basing our discussions and calculations on the current 3-2-1 1+ configurations. And it would help if we could have the actual number of 1+ units and the parameters of those 1+ units in your breakdown, because there is that concern that has been raised. Will those in fact turn into 2-bedroom units, or sort of de facto 2-bedroom units from a practical standpoint? And if you could present any information which suggests that, they don't do that or won't do that or can't do that, that would be helpful to the board.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I understand your ask. You're asking me to provide a bedroom mix on a theoretical 135 unit project that we would submit to Mass Housing?
Yes, that's right.
Why?
Well, because that bedroom mix, as I said, you've said that you wouldn't support the 3-2-1 bedroom mix if we asked you to drop to 135 units.
No, that's not what I said. If we did 135 units under a LIP, I would attempt to maintain that proportionality. If we did not reach an agreement and we go through the traditional 40B route, then yes, my 135 unit project, I have not designed that project, nor do I intend to in the immediate future. But I will tell you that on a gross square footage basis, that project will probably be identical to the project before you. So if you take 157 units and whatever our gross square footage is, I did not bring my architectural, and you chop that up to 135, there's going to be more 2 and 3 bedroom units and less ones. So but I don't want to, why are we talking about a hypothetical non-lit project? I'm telling you, if we reduce the density on a lit project, we will maintain, if not exact proportionality, very close proportionality. I'm not gonna agree to start eliminating 1+s because the rents in this building on the market side are gonna be, they're gonna be market rate rents and not cheap. And the market we're catering to they're not going to be people stuffing kids into a room with no windows. And on the affordable side, that's not allowed. All right. So I'm not going to go through an exercise of demonstrating that 1+s don't generate kids. We're not allowed to have, they're not bedrooms by code. And in our experience, they're empty nesters or singles, or maybe it's a couple that wants to put a crib in there for a new baby who's obviously not in the schools. So I'm not going to go through that exercise. I'm attempting to compromise. We can reduce the density, but I'm not doing that because it's a waste of time and not germane to anything we're talking about.
Okay, so I apologize. I misinterpreted something you said a little bit earlier, and I'm glad you made the clarification. So I think that probably fixes us for items 1 and 2 for the time being. Jeff Bodmer Turner, you had a comment?
Yes, Eli, I just need to understand whether Mr. Engler heard you when you asked for a breakdown that included a breakout of the 1+ units. And I'd like to add to that whether there's a differential in rent for a 1+ unit as opposed to a 1-bedroom unit that doesn't have this amenity of the office space that you're talking about.
Sure. Well, I thought, first of all, I apologize. I'm pretty sure we submitted the difference between 1+, 2, but if we didn't, you'll have that information tomorrow. 2, to answer your question, in a vacuum, a 1+ will generate more rent than a 1-bedroom. However, there's other factors at play. You know, is it on the top level with the beautiful view? Is it, on the first level by the elevator shaft? There's different factors. So, within a building on how rents get set. But if you had the identical, a 1-bedroom and a 1-bedroom plus in the same location in the building, a 1-bed, and they were the same size, they each were 800 square feet or whatever, 900, a 1-bedroom plus would command a higher rent, yes. Not dramatically, but yeah, there would be a small premium.
So you're suggesting that you're going to charge different rents based on where the unit is in the building? And does that mean that the rent structure that you provided to us is an average rent, a median rent,
It's an average
or
rent.
a maximum rent?
No, I would say it's an average rent. I mean, we have not begun to even remotely think about pricing individual units, but we have an
But you've done-
idea on a square footage basis, on an average, obviously, we know.
Yep.
So, but, you know, within any building, I don't think anybody would be, you know, so naive to think that a fourth floor corner unit, one bedroom, would be priced the same as a first floor, one bedroom interior unit.
I'm not suggesting that any of us are that naive. I'm just trying to get down to understanding the revenue stream that you're talking about as an average revenue stream for these units, which could range in, we don't have the range. So is this also applicable to affordable units, that there's a range in affordable units?
No, the affordable unit rents are different. They're set, they're not, the one bedroom affordable, whether it's on the fourth floor or the first floor, is the same. Same with the 2s and 3s. There's no, those are set by the state.
Okay.
We have no influence on that.
I have other questions in that regard, but I don't want to get into a long conversation about it.
All right. So before I move on to, I think item 3, I do see that there is a hand raised, but I'm not going to be taking any public comment right now. Go through the items in the fiscal impact section, items 1 through 9, and get through the board's questions back and forth with the developer on that, and then I'll take up to a half an hour of comment from the public. So that's just to be clear that if you got your hand raised, don't expect me to be answering that for a while.
Eli, it's Christine. I'm sorry. I just had a really hard time understanding you in the beginning. You were speaking very quickly. So I was just going to ask you to slow down because none of us have this document that you have. That was it at this moment.
All right. All right, so I think we actually had discussed item 2, which is the 321 discussion. Item 3 was precluding any future additions and expansions. The developer agrees to that right now. Item 4 was local preference for 70% of the affordable units. Applicant working with the town, and the request from the applicant is really around paperwork that the town has to issue. Do board members have any questions on the applicant's response on that one? Yeah. All right, item 5. Reducing to 60% of the AMI for half of the, or all of the affordable units. Mr. Engler, could you, you said that you could provide the financial analysis which supports this assertion. Can you go into this briefly?
Sure, it's not a complicated analysis, and I'll submit something to the town in the next few days, but basically it's the delta between the affordable rent and at under a LIP value, and then a 60% rent. What's the delta in monthly rent? And then what's that over a year? And then on a capitalized basis, applying a conservative cap rate, you know, 5% or 5.25 over 30 years, the value of that change is approximately $85,000 of value in the building for one unit. And I know that because we had that discussion in the last 12 months in the city of Newton on much larger projects. So I'll submit that to the town, and you can look at it. but it's really not, I mean, it's not in dispute because we have one rent, we have a second rent. They're both fixed by the state. What's the delta? I mean, you can argue a little bit on the cap rate. We chose a fairly conservative cap rate, but that's how value is assessed or determined, I should say. So I'll submit that, but that's like that's an ask. I don't think the board realizes how financially impactful that is. So it's just not something we're going to entertain.
Okay, well, we'll definitely want to see the financial analysis. I'd like to express at least my perspective on the AMI and why it was important to us. We've run numbers on, we have, a desire to, from a cultural standpoint, have the ability for people who work in the town, live in the town. And we have a pretty wide range of salaries. And a lot of those people really, really can't afford to live in this town. An 80% AMI number is not really going to help them all that much. In addition, some of the people who are trying to downsize, an 80% AMI is not necessarily going to help those people all that much either. So while, achieving that 10% SHI number is important to us, generating actually truly affordable housing is also quite important to us. So if we can't get a 60% AMI number from you in this agreement, then we probably need to come up with some other means of achieving that. I hope that there will be some means of doing that. That is something that we're going to have to look into. Other board members have any comments on the affordability of affordable units?
Yes, Eli, I have a question, Mr. Engler. If 60% doesn't do it, as Mr. Bowling has indicated, affordable housing is pretty critical for us, and even 80%. Would the math work if you were to say push up the number of units that are going to be at 80% from 25 to, I don't know, 27 or 28 or something? I don't know how the discounted numbers work, and maybe you don't either in terms of what market rate is.
No, I mean, it's a good question, but in a town like Manchester, the delta between the market rates and the affordable rates are significant. Some other towns,
appreciate that.
It's not a big delta. So, to create additional affordable units or, write down isn't as much. But in one hand, where you say, yeah, we want less units, Jeff, we want, take out 22 units, do 3 stories, do a more expensive roof line. Oh, and by the way, do 60% units. If the town, and I appreciate, Mr. Chairman, your comments, I do, and my business is affordable housing. If you said, listen, we really mean this, do 157 units, and the other financial mitigation is less important to us in comparison to doing affordable housing, and give us 15 or 20 affordable units at 60, I may be able to consider that. But it's asking that at the same time you're asking us to lose units, at the same time you're asking for other financial mitigation. It's not financially feasible. It just doesn't work. And for those of people that are like, oh, we don't believe the developer, I'm financing 3 projects right now. 2 in Winchester, 1 in Situate, and another one we did in Bridgewater last year. So, and I'm working with 3 different contractors on all of these projects. So I know what these things cost to build and to finance and how they're getting capitalized. And I would easily be able to support our cost basis for these projects. So it's not like I'm not being disingenuous. I mean, this is an expensive project, and to be asking for all of these things that have a financial hit, some of it I can entertain to a certain degree, but I can't entertain all of it as one package. It just doesn't, it's not, I wouldn't be able to get this project financed.
All right, well, so as a follow-up to that, so you're gonna send us some numbers with regard to the 60% to show the uneconomic aspects that you've experienced there. Could you run some numbers adding, say, another 3 units to the 25% at the 80 and see where that number comes out? You probably know or approximate, but I don't know if you've done that before.
Well, it would be running through our, I mean, it would be the same exercise in terms of assessing what's the delta between a market rate unit, that rent, and an affordable unit. So I think it's going to come out. I mean, I haven't done that, but if I had to guess, it's probably going to come out even at a higher value than the 85,000 because the delta is even greater. We could look at that, John. You know, and
I'm curious. I'm curious. It's just looking at it at a different angle.
If nothing else, it'll be illustrative, I think, to the board to understand, you know, the valuation and how the rental kind of profile, you know, works. So
Thank you.
I'll make note of that.
Other board members with comments or questions on this right now?
Eli,
Jeff?
Jeff, Mr. Engler, could you clarify when you say 85K per unit, are you talking about 85K over all the units in the development, 135, 157 or whatever, or the 25% affordables?
No, what I'm saying is to change the valuation on a single unit to convert that unit from the approved LIP rent under the program we're under to write that unit down to a 60% rent has a plus or minus negative value to the project of $85,000 for one unit.
For
20 units.
For one of the affordable units that was marked down that way.
Yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
All right, Becky or Ann, do you have any comments on this before we move on to the next item? Becky's muted.
Can see my mouth moving, but no words coming out. Not at the moment, but I definitely will want to come back. Thank you.
Ann?
Nothing at this time. Everybody's asked what I need to know.
Thank you. All right. Water main footnote 1. I'm going to come to the footnote 1 at the end. So agreed outside of footnote 1. And yeah. And for the individual water meters, that one was agreed on. Professional fees.
Eli, if I may.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that 2 things about the water main extension, the water main. Is an 8-inch main what the town needs? Or the town wants? And does Mr. Engler's proposal mean connecting to the existing main at the end of School Street or replacing the main along School Street, which is a necessary condition to providing adequate water, as far as I understand, to the project?
So my reading, I'm going to let both Greg and Jeff Engler speak to this, but my reading of it was the current main is a 6-inch main that needs to go to an 8-inch main to adequately support this project. 8 inches would suffice. And yes, did I get that right, Greg?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, we've talked to DPW on several occasions. Would love to just tie into the line, you know, out in School Street. But we have, I mean, don't quote me on this, but it's a significant run of like 2,000 feet of 8-inch main we have to run to tie in. I mean, the good news to the town, and one of the reasons I think it's appropriate for MassWorks is, you know, that main would not just benefit our project, it would benefit everybody along that whole line. You know, it would have a lot of benefit for the town. So, but yes, it's an 8-inch main for the entirety of that run, which is long and expensive. I forget exactly where we tie in to the existing, but my civil has spoken several times with your DPW department, who are very knowledgeable and have been helpful. So, you know, that would need to be fully designed, but it's a significant infrastructure project.
Good to go, Ann?
I'd just like Greg's confirmation that this is in fact the full, what he's talking about is the full run that's necessary to be improved.
No, it is the extension where we do not have any pipe currently. Basically, perhaps a few hundred feet of overlap, but basically, what Mr. Engler is proposing is extending the line where there is no line. Our current system, without the project, we had planned to replace the line on School Street, to upgrade it, not because of this project, but because of other needs townwide.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Eli, if I may,
Go ahead, Becky.
are we going to come back to number 6 being the water main extension? And if not, I do have a question regarding the footnote as it pertains to this one.
Yeah, I was going to come back to the footnote for sure. The water main extension, I wasn't going to
That's
come
fine.
back to it. So if we cover the footnote, you're good?
Yep.
All right, because the footnote's referenced in a few of these other items.
Right. Thank you.
All right, so any questions on professional fees and expenses from board members? All right. Under item 9, item A, $500,000 towards a new ladder truck, or as I said, fire equipment. Agreeing to contribution, but only a footnote 1 and 2 are satisfied. And number 2, I'd like to know why you tied the condition to this to number 2. Mr. Engler.
The question was why we structured 2 or 9B the way we did?
9A to be contingent on footnote number 2.
Oh, why? Because as their conversation has borne itself out, I anticipated the board asking for a density reduction. So we can't give a density reduction and $500,000 worth of fire equipment. So we need the town to help offset some of our costs with footnote 1 or 2. So I guess another way to put this is if the town was not able to do footnote 1 or 2, and they really wanted the $500,000 for the fire equipment, we're not going to be able to get to 135 units.
I see. Okay. So it's the interdependence on the density that's
Correct.
1 and 2 on the.
Correct.
All right, that clarified.
But Eli, may I excuse me a moment?
Go ahead, Becky.
In 9A, Mr. Engler wrote footnote number 1 and number 2 are satisfied. And just now, I thought I heard Mr. Engler say number 1 or number 2 are satisfied. So is it that both must be satisfied or one or the other? Mr. Engler, please.
I wrote both. I may be able to backpedal a little bit to say only number 1. I don't want to commit to that on this call because I just saw it yesterday. So I can't say for certain. But
Thank you.
definitely at least one of them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eli, thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
So I have a question, Eli.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So Mr. Engler, so I understand number 1, you can quantify that because there's money that's tied to that depending upon what is it, mass, whatever the group is, this group, right. Number 2, it's kind of an application process to lift that. I don't quite see the dollar value that's tied to that unless you look at the whole septic versus sewer angle, and the sewer angle is a less expensive alternative for you. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, the sewer angle on an operational basis is more beneficial to us. The cap, I mean, let's just, for discussion's sake, say the town was able to lift the consent order and we were allowed to tie in. We still have a very expensive, we have to lay all the pipe to tie into the system, which is very expensive we're not asking the town to do that. So net, your assessment, John, is pretty spot on in terms of it doesn't have the immediate, capital benefit to us that a MassWorks grant does. But where it does help us is on an ongoing operational basis. It's just simpler to tie into the municipal system as opposed to the maintenance of the septic system, which we're familiar with. But there's significant dollars associated with that we have to cover from our ongoing NOI. So it just has, there is a value. I couldn't on this call say exactly what that value is, but I know it's, not insignificant financially to us.
Okay, so I mean, so you're assessing that when you're looking at 9A and tying both of those in there, well, we'll have to see how the rest of the
MassWorks grant has a bigger financial impact to us.
Yes.
So to the previous question, and me being non-committal, but let's just say for discussion's sake, and I haven't thought this through, but if we did get the grant on 1 and 2 didn't happen, maybe we can't get to 500,000, but maybe we can get to a meaningful 6-figure contribution. I mean, once again, I need to just run this through our models a little bit, but hopefully I'm being somewhat clear.
I understand the process. Thank you.
All right. 500,000 to the CPC Land Conservation Fund. So your response is that you would agree to the contribution, but only if Manchester Asset Conservation Trust agrees to support this application and agrees to no future litigation. Otherwise, the applicant will not agree to any financial contributions to conservation land initiatives at this time. Obviously, that's going to involve an external entity with a legal position. So I'm actually going to ask John Whitten if he has any comment here.
Mr. Chairman, is this regarding the linkage to the Conservation Trust?
This is the under paying one-time contributions toward capital needs. Item B, where we had proposed paying $500,000 to the CPC Land Conservation Fund. And the response was the applicant will agree to this contribution, but only if the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust agrees to support this application and agrees to no future litigation. Otherwise, the applicant will not agree to any financial contributions to conservation land initiatives at this time.
So I understand Mr. Engler's request. The obvious problem for the town is the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust is a private nonprofit organization. The town has no control over it. The Board of Selectmen could not make any promises or assurances. The right not, or the covenant not to appeal is an agreement that Mr. Engler could work out with any abutter. And that should be independent of the Board of Selectmen's negotiation. So I appreciate his response, but frankly, there's no commitment the town could make to work out an agreement with a third party not to take an appeal of the town's own decision. So it's something Mr. Engler and other developers could work out with other abutters. That's not uncommon, but with all due respect, the town should have no part of that.
Mr. Engler, any comment?
Yep, I agree with everything Mr. Whitten said. I'd still like it in the document because there's a difference between legal leverage that you have with the trust, which is none, and political leverage, and somebody being able to see in this agreement what a future action would mean relative to a donation happening or not happening. So I certainly I can include this in the development agreement under the expectation that you have no influence legally and cannot control future action from the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust. 100% agree with Mr. Whitten's legal interpretation, but legal interpretations and political realities are two very different things. So that's why my position on this. And as it relates to conservation land, I can in good faith write a $500,000 check for conservation land when the most public and outspoken opponent of this project has been the trust. So I don't think we have to talk about this in any more detail, but that's my position on the issue.
All right, Mr. Dyer, I do see your hand raised, but I'm afraid I'm not, right now, this phase of the negotiation has to be between the Board of Selectmen and the developer. And right now I need to establish the developer's position, and I'm not going to take comment from MECT right now. I will certainly be in discussion with MECT at some point, but I don't want to bring MECT into this conversation on this point just now.
If I may, Eli, just a point of clarification.
A point of clarification, yes.
MECT does not actually own any land that abuts this project directly. And we've spoken, land is nearby. We've spoken on conservation values generally for all the land around there. The entity that owns most of the conservation land adjacent to the site is the town of Manchester, and is responsible for it. Trustees of Reservations also owns a chunk that abuts the land. And I guess I want to point out that a $500,000 contribution to the town would have nothing to do with MECT acquiring land. It has to do with the town acquiring conservation land. Thank you.
All right. Any questions from board members right now on the 500,000 to the CPC? All right. $500,000 towards an athletics field project. So again, the developer agrees based on if the town will support footnotes 1 and or 2. And again, this appears to be tied to the density question that we have opposed to the development. And I'm assuming, Mr. Engler, that your position on this matches that as your position on the ladder truck or the fire equipment. And I'm assuming that my broadening the discussion to fire equipment as opposed to ladder truck does not present a problem to you.
No, it does not. I mean, you know, we could structure it at the discretion of the fire department or whatever. This one's a little bit different. I mean, listen, we're all friends here, but candidly, this was a pretty bold ask. I mean, this has nothing to do with our project. The fire equipment, I kind of concede does. You know, conservation land to a degree, but a ball field. In the spirit of cooperation, we didn't dismiss it offhand, but this is, you know, let's just say in the pecking order, this would be last relative to, you know, where the town is, relative to density, relative to fire equipment, relative to some of the other asks that we haven't even gotten to. So I hope the town can understand my position on this one. But if you were to allow us to tie into municipal sewer and get us a substantial MassWorks grant, you know, we could make a contribution, and a meaningful one. Would it be $500,000? I don't know about that, but it also wouldn't be, you know, $5,000. So, but this is, you know, this is the type of ask under 40B, you know, under a quote unquote normal 40B. What Mr. Witten can attest, you can't ask for mitigation that's unrelated to the project, and not even the most, you know, I don't know who could say that this relates to the project. So anyway, that's our position on that one.
Okay. Well, yeah, I understand that under a normal 40B, the town wouldn't be in any position to ask for this. And there's a lot of things that we wouldn't be in a position to ask for, but under a LIP, we have a lot more flexibility. We could ask for, you know, the front of the units to be decorated with pink flamingos, and that would be, you know, reasonable. Under a LIP, it would be weird, but as far as the athletic fields are concerned, I think I can provide you some motivation there, knowing that we're not going to get to a conclusion right now. The town has had resource allocation problems with its athletic fields for a very long time. Some of them are classical fields, some of them are turf fields, and we continually look for new space or ways to develop existing space so that the athletic fields have more availability to them. They're taxed, and they're overtaxed from a usage standpoint, not just for kids, but for adult use as well. And your development, regardless of whether or not you might add traffic or add shuttles or add other things, will add to the population of the town, and therefore would impact athletic fields under any reasonable set of assumptions. So that's why this is in here, because it's a resource that we've had challenges with, and that you could will impact with your project negatively, and therefore we're looking for contribution. So that's the motivation. All right. So any comments from board members on the athletic fields right now? All right, let's jump down to the footnotes here briefly. And I want to make a comment. So for the most part, footnotes one and 2 were kind of separable. Although footnote 1 also included the infrastructure costs associated with bringing the sewer to the site. So what I'd like to do actually is have a little conversation right now with board members around footnote 1, setting aside the question about sewer. And in the context of the grant process and supporting this with respect to the water line, which is really pretty essential to project overall. Where board members are and would be in supporting having the town chase this grant and tying it to some aspect of the conditions. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to.
Go, Becky.
Okay. I have a couple questions regarding the MassWorks grants for Mr. Engler. And the first question would be, do you know if MassWorks, if the grant limits the number of applications the town can apply for through them at any given time?
I do not, but I can find that out. In other words, can the same municipality have 3 MassWorks grants pending it for 3 different projects? Yeah, I don't know that, but I can look into it.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know that and maybe get the town planner, Sue Brown, to maybe weigh in on what she knows about MassWorks. Provide us with a little insight there.
So Becky,
Yes,
if I
Greg.
might, I can jump in. So at least in the past, I've applied for MassWorks grants in other municipalities and have been successful in receiving them.
Have
So
or
in the
have
past-
not, I'm sorry.
I have, yes.
Okay,
So in the past, they have allowed you to put in multiple requests, applications. They will certainly ask you to prioritize. If you have multiple applications in at the same time. If they're currently doing that, we would have to double check. But in the past, they have allowed multiple applications.
thank you, Greg. I just asked because I do know that there are some other things coming up in town that and I don't know if the town is looking for the MassWorks to provide money for some of those. And I wouldn't want to have one competing against the other if that were the case.
Other questions?
No, I just the applicant would be happy to help out with this, which is good. That's all. Thank you.
I have a question, Eli.
Go ahead, John.
Yes. Jeff Engler, I assume that you've applied for these grants in the past with your projects, and have you won them or not?
I'm
Or is that
sad
the
to
wrong
say
assumption?
Your assumption is incorrect. I have never
Okay.
applied admittedly for a MassWorks grant. However, members of my team have on several occasions, and I've also identified a skill consultant who specializes in this. So I think we would collectively be in good hands, but I have never on any of my development entities applied for a MassWorks grant.
Okay. I'm kind of looking at the process that you said, if that happens, then there has to be, quote, a modification request. And I was really kind of going in that direction. How does this work? Because it sounds a little complicated to me. You're going to settle on one set of arrangements. And then if this comes through, and depending upon how much it comes through, you kind of shift things around. Have your colleagues dealt with that?
Not in this exact scenario, but I think your counsel is pretty skilled, and I think he and we could structure it in a way. Let me answer the question a different way. Frequent changes to comprehensive permits or modifications are very frequent, sometimes major, sometimes minor, that happen after a permit is issued, maybe 2 months, maybe 10 months, maybe 2 years. What I just can't, as I'm sure the board can appreciate, I can't just sit idle for a year and hope that the MassWorks grant gets approved and then file. But what we can do is I can file a plan and go through the process and have a legally bound condition that says if a MassWorks grant is awarded, within a certain time frame for a minimum amount or more, that I will be required to submit a modification to the zoning board that would reflect a smaller project. Or, if the grant, and I'm just talking out loud here because we're introducing a lot of things tonight, but let's just say for discussion's sake, we arrived at a density in a program irrespective of footnote 1 and 2. But I said, I'm not doing any mitigation of any kind without 1 and 2. That would be a different discussion because I wouldn't necessarily need to modify the permit. I would just have gotten a grant, in which case that then triggers me writing several checks to the town. So I need to think about that on my own end a little bit because admittedly, the scenario is not perfect, but I think it is achievable the way I'm contemplating it and doing a modification. But, I might come to the determination that I'm just going to sink or swim with the plan that I can live with, that you can live with, but some of these other mitigation measures are tied to the award of that grant. So, I know I'm throwing a lot out at you. This is kind of, being discussed, as we go. So I don't know if I made the issue more convoluted or perhaps enlightened it a little bit, or maybe neutral, but I apologize.
Well, I mean, we're in the same situation, and I think what the board would want is we'd want to see the scenarios. If it comes through, this is the way it's going to look, and if it doesn't come through, this is the way it's going to look. It's not like we have one scenario, and if it doesn't come through, all right, well, let's figure out what's going to happen next.
Absolutely, and that's a fair request. And that's something that we would have to do because you, in fairness to you, you don't want to not know like what's behind door number 2, and I would want to know. So yes, so we need to, as I said, over the next week, allow me to start to be a little bit more concrete with some of these things, and then we could figure out some of the milestone dates and whatnot that are associated with it.
Okay.
John Whitten, did you have any enlightenment to add of your own at this point, or do we wait for a little bit?
I think we can wait, Mr. Chairman. I have worked with MassWorks grants. I'm working on a large project right now for the town of Maynard with the town of Maynard as their counsel. So I'm happy to talk to the board about that as time moves on. It is an available program. The level of funding is in question, I think, but that is not really relevant for I think the board moving forward with this conversation.
All right. All right, other questions from the board on footnote 1 minus sewer? Okay, so Mr. Engler, for your sake, if we were to add, I separated that because sewer is a different conversation, like I said at the beginning. And I didn't want to take on footnote 1 with the sewer embedded into it. Let's proceed as if we, along our analysis of footnote 1, assuming that if we added, if we were tackling the sewer item and adding it back into footnote 1, it wouldn't modify the impact of the MassWorks grant at all. We'll just make that assumption for now and come back to it if we need to. Now, as far as footnote 2 is concerned in the sewer, I think that we need, like I said at the beginning, I think that we need to go back and take counsel and look at where we stand with the DEP and evaluate how we think of the impact of this project on how it would impact our sewer system and our infrastructure, because we haven't had that discussion to speak of so far. So we'll do that and then we'll get back to you. So we've got through the initial pass on the fiscal impact section. There are some things that both sides need to do. What I'd like to do now, what I'd like to do now is to start, unless there's other questions or comments or things that board members want or Mr. Engler wants to revisit in the fiscal impact side, I'd like to open this up and get some public comment. And then after we do some public comment, answer some questions for a maximum of about a half an hour, I'd like to go back and confirm what the next steps are, what the pieces of information are that both the developer and the town need to produce, and schedule a next meeting. So is everybody okay with moving to public comment? Do board members want to go back and revisit any of these items right now? Mr. Engler, do you have any additional comments or questions here?
I don't, and you said, I guess at the end, what I was going to ask you is I want to make sure my marching orders are clear, but it sounds like you're going to deliver those at the end. So I'll wait for that.
Yeah, if you want to do it now, you can certainly do it now. What's your preference?
It's at your pleasure, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make sure that I and the board are on the same page relative to what you're asking me to do, or what I'm being asked to deliver and or respond to by the next time we have a meeting.
All right, let's do it after we do some public comment. So it's 8:30, 8:31. We'll go to 9 o'clock with potentially with public comment. I'll open it up to at this point. If you want to speak, I'll ask that you limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes. If you have a question, we'll try to answer it for you. Raise your hand and I will recognize you. If you're waving in a Zoom window, physically waving in the Zoom window, I'm probably not going to see it because there are 6 pages of them. I need you to raise your hand in Zoom fashion by using the raise hand button at the bottom. And I will recognize you, ask you to identify yourself and allow you to speak. Sandy.
Hi, Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. This has been very beneficial and enlightening conversation, so thank you all. And this question is just meant for clarity's sake. And this is to Jeff Engler. Very early on in the conversation, and I was trying to follow the density conversation, is that if a certain number is not agreed to, there was a number 250 that you mentioned. And I was curious if that would mean that if agreements are not made regarding these density numbers, that the footprint of what you would take forward would be the same and you would try to go after 250 units. They would be more 1 bedrooms versus 3 bedrooms. I didn't know where that 250 came from. If you could clarify, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, as part of this Q&A, if you could direct me to answer, I'm
Sure, I
conscious
understand.
of not having a conversation with the audience. So
Yeah. So, Mr. Engler, feel free to answer Sandy Rogers' question.
Okay, thank you. Sandy, I apologize. I'm not sure where that 250 came from or in what context. Under no scenario are we going to be doing 250 units. So apologize for any confusion or if I insinuated as much. I think I'm not even sure where to go, but I think what we were talking about is for some reason, there is a large project cap which ties to the number of housing units in the municipality. And if we're not able to reach an agreement, I will go to a different subsidizing agency and be subject to that large project cap, which I believe is 135 units, plus or minus a unit. However, there is no bedroom cap. So, theoretically, I'm not saying we will do this, we won't, but we could do 135 3-bedroom units and there's no restriction on that. So, what I'm trying to communicate is that we and the board, there's benefits to both of us to find common ground and reach an agreement, because the board is going to get a project, with the unit mix that they're much more supportive of. And in return, I will get political goodwill, which I'm putting a value on moving forward through this process. So, but the long-winded way of saying that I'm not sure where 250 came from, that's not on the table under any scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Denny Hall.
This is Denny Hall, 20 Masconomo Street, Manchester. I would like to suggest to the board to add a additional constraint or condition that to the point if you get to the point where the project's going forward, that the developer would provide a 100% payment performance bond. This is a very difficult site and with, at least today, unknown conditions. So a payment and performance bond would give the town some comfort that if for whatever reason the project ran into significant cost overruns and the developer was not able to finish the project, you have a completion bond from hopefully a AAA insurance company that will provide the capital to get that done. Second, given the environmental sensitivity of the site, I think it's imperative that the board stipulate that the developer provide environmental insurance on the project, at least during the construction and then some component thereafter. Something in the range of $10 million during the construction period, something less thereafter. Thank you.
Okay, we will be covering the environmental aspects in a subsequent meeting. I'll take note of your comment about the environmental insurance. As far as the performance bond is concerned, I will ask, I guess I'll ask Mr. Engler if you have any general comments around that right now, and I may ask Mr. Whitten. I don't want to get too deep into this, but just generally.
I'll let Mr. Whitten go first.
Mr. Whitten?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Board of Selectmen certainly could add a condition for the requirements of a performance bond. What I would say, though, is that is generally best left to the permit granting agency, in this case, the Board of Appeals. And the reason why is it's really needs to be tied to the development plans, which at this point are still very preliminary. So it's an excellent suggestion and one that counsel for the Board of Appeals, whoever that may be, will not overlook. I guarantee that. So I would be comfortable if the Board of Selectmen didn't entertain that for your negotiations. But Mr. Hall's comments are totally appropriate for the Board of Appeals. And to the extent that the Board of Selectmen wants to belt and suspender it, could put in a condition that the Board of Appeals shall consider, should consider, we request the Board of Appeals make sure that it considers, or words of similar import to assure the public that the performance guarantee will be part of the project. Just one more thing, Mr. Chairman. Performance guarantees generally speak to impact on public ways or public property. Because frankly, while the town doesn't want to see a project go defunct, there's no municipal exposure necessarily to a project that either files for bankruptcy or can't proceed. The real issue is the impact on public facilities. So to that extent, the Board of Appeals will definitely require any impact on public ways, public utilities, public property to be pursuant to a bond or a surety or a covenant. So I'm very comfortable on leaving that matter to the Board of Appeals, and it's really up to the Board of Selectmen whether you want to add that as an additional requirement. No wrong answer here at all.
Mr. Engler, anything to add at this point?
No, I mean, I think Mr. Witten's right. I mean, 100% complete, I've never seen that. Usually it would be tied to some sort of infrastructure. You know, there is a whole, it's not a bond, but, you know, we have a whole operation and maintenance plan during construction of, you know, very specific obligations and construction measures that we need to adhere to, or we can get a cease and desist from the town. So the town will have leverage on us, you know, during that process, you know, but keep in mind, you know, we're you know, to get into this process and, you know, the world come to an end or whatnot. I mean, this is going to be an $80 million project or whatnot. There's going to be a lot of people, lenders, equity providers that are going to have recourse, that are going to be able to finish the project if, you know, heaven forbid we were to go bankrupt, which we don't anticipate. So, I mean, I think Mr. Witten's right. I think it's better left to the zoning board. You know, some sort of bond might be reasonable if, you know, we left the stormwater management incomplete or something like that. But we're not going to post a bond to complete the entire project. I mean, that's just, you know, that's inconsistent with the way things are done.
Excuse me. In fact, you can stipulate that the contractor provide a payment and performance bond on the construction contract. That is very normal and very typical, and that's really what I'm asking about.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, well, that's a different. We'll have that with our construction contractor, but that's different than a bond that's being held by the municipality or the payment you need to make to the municipality. So.
All right, Ms. Delicio. Christina Delicio. All right, moving on to Sheila.
Hi, this is Sheila Coughlin, 7 Lincoln Ave. And a couple of questions. One is, I know there were some studies done regarding traffic, and I just wanted to know if they had been done during timeframes that were not holidays, and if we had factored in sort of non-pandemic normal traffic to the school. The reason I ask is that School Street is already quite hazardous for children to cross, and I'm concerned about increases in traffic and what we could do to mitigate that and improve safety. And then the second question I have is around the numbers that we're using as the baseline for the number of students attending school. Are the averages that we're looking at similar in terms of being kind of like magnet schools, you know, or at least a top 20 school as Manchester Essex is, and the fact that it could draw a lot of people to town? Those are my questions.
Repeat the last question about the averages.
Yeah, so I know that there were some numbers thrown out based on, you know, the typical number of students we would anticipate going to the school. I don't know what the foundation of those numbers is, but given that Manchester Essex is a highly desirable school system, you know, I've heard stories of, you know, people couch surfing just to get into this town. So I guess one concern is, you know, are the averages in these units going to be higher than, you know, an average school system?
Okay, so let's take the traffic item first. Greg, do you want to speak to that?
So the traffic studies were done by Mr. Engler's consultants. And I believe they were done over the summer into the fall. And they did adjust for COVID and lack of school being in session. I believe, if I have my figures right, they increased the counts by some 30% or so to account for the impacts of the pandemic and school not being in session. And then our reviewer, so the town then brought on a consultant to review the work that the developer's consultant provided. He found that their work was credible and agreed with the basics of the analysis. He focused primarily his concerns on the access road and safety concerns around the building and getting to it or away from it. And in terms of impacts to sort of the rest of the town, his suggestion for mitigating those impacts into the core of the village was to advocate for some sort of a transit or shuttle system of some sort.
Mr. Engler, would you be interested in addressing your any calculations that you've had regarding school?
I would say our fiscal impact consultant took a wide range of data. I mean, they have a database of thousands and thousands of units, and I hear, consistent concerns. I mean, we've permitted projects in Winchester, Wellesley, Newton, Lexington, Brookline. I mean, I'd like to see all those towns in a room fighting over who has the best educational system, public education, because they're all pretty darn good. So we think our school-age children representation was accurate, but don't take our word for it. The town hired its own fiscal impact consultant who did the full review and said our numbers were credible and real. So that's the whole purpose of peer review. Don't take our word for it. Listen to your own consultant. So we think our analysis stands on its own. Your own consultant has confirmed as much. So I think we feel pretty good about that.
Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
So we did ask RKG to take that into account, and they felt like the numbers were fairly accurate. They didn't disagree with the approach. They did add some additional students. They assumed that some of those one-bedroom units would generate some students. A single parent with a child may move into a one-bedroom. So they did add some additional students. They did lower the per student impact because they took out some of the fixed costs that don't vary depending on the number of students in the system. For example, our debt service doesn't go up or down depending on the number of students. So they added some students to the total count, but they lowered the cost per student. And so they came within, literally it was within a few $100s of what Mr. Engler's consultant came up with a dollar impact for students.
Thank you.
Sheila Hill. Sheila Hill.
All right, thank you. 2 Running Ridge Row. I would like to understand number 6, main extension mitigation.
Sheila, you're going to have to restart that because there was some disruption in your sound system for a minute there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Number 6, the water main extension. I'd like to better understand the scenario, particularly as it relates to the footnote. I'm I heard a number of figures. And I wonder if, I don't know, maybe Greg, you could take us through the scenario. The grant has to be agreed to first. I heard $3 to $6 million, and that would be for all of School Street. I heard 2,000 feet, which would be the Engler portion, taking the end point of School Street across to Shingle Hill. How would that scenario play out should we decide to start on that?
Actually, can I get Mr. Engler to address that, please?
Okay, whoever.
Geez, I hit something on my computer and I can't see. All right. So here's my understanding of how the MassWorks grant works at a high level. Is as part of the application, we have to include both plans and credible construction estimates for that work. So at a minimum, we need to tie into the municipal water system. So we have to run, once again, forgive me for not having the exact details, but call it several thousand feet of 8-inch water main in the ground. So we have to, have a construction crew run that pipe, tie into the municipal system and bring it to our site. That, I think the cost of that is going to be $2 to $3 million. Now, if we also include sewer, it's a similar exercise in that we have to run an acceptably sized sewer main from our project to tie into the appropriate place into the municipal system. Where that would be exactly, I don't know, but it would be a long stretch. So that would probably be the same price or more to do that work. So call it, $4 to $6 million of work for both sewer and water. We would have plans designed, we would have construction estimates, and that would be submitted to MassWorks as part of the application to show that the town is facilitating the creation of new infrastructure for the benefit of both affordable housing and economic development, which is precisely what the MassWorks program was set up to fund. So I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but that's effectively, what we're asking the town to do is help. The grant has to come from the municipality, the application has to come from the municipality. We will hire a consultant at our expense. We will make our team available to the town. In fact, we will probably write 90% of the application, but there will be things that we need the municipality to do and respond to, and ultimately it needs to be signed by them. How that money gets transferred from the town to us, I'm sure my lawyer and Mr. Whitten could figure out that mechanism. I'm not worried about that, but basically that's an overview of how we see that this could work.
So if I could just jump in a little bit.
Yeah.
On
And may I
this.
say, Greg, I'm interested in the piece of the School Street connection for all of School Street. I thought that was involved in this footnote to redo School Street as well.
So the footnote doesn't address the rest of School Street, but that
Okay.
is on our capital improvement plan. It's slated for the coming budget that we're going to be voting on whenever we get to have town meeting this year. So that project is estimated to be in the $750,000 range. It's a different project. The pipe's already there, and so it's not as expensive as what Mr. Engler needs to do to go out to his development site. So we have an estimate. It needs to be refined, but we think it's in the $700,000 to $800,000 range to redo the existing pipe on School Street. So that's that piece. Typically MassWorks grants are given to the municipality, and that we would be responsible for the bidding and overseeing the construction of that pipe, because it in essence becomes a municipal pipe that services Mr. Engler's property, and as he indicated, it could service other properties as well. And so the monies would come to the town, and then we would pay the contractor that we hire to put that pipe in. We can collaborate with developers on that effort. Again, I'm just drawing on some past experience that I've had in another community where we did this. So that's typically how that would work. And so that we absorb the costs that Mr. Engler would otherwise have. And so that's where we need to negotiate and nail down basically how that credit comes back to the town.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
All right, so it's about 5 till 9. We have Robert Meal and then Bill Cross, and I expect to stop there. Robert Meal, you're up. Mr. Meal, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, I have 2 questions. And a comment. Thank you to the Board of Selectmen for all the time that they're putting in on this difficult project. And the first question is, what would be the impact on the quality and the quantity of water for Manchester over the coming years? And the second question is, what do you do with all of the land you have to remove as you blast Shingle Hill in 2 in order to prepare the construction site? And what's the environmental impact of that?
So I will answer item number 1 to the best of my ability. The intent of this is to have no impact to the quality and supply of Manchester's water supply. That's actually going to be addressed to some extent in the environmental section when we get to it. And as for what happens with the material that's going to be removed and blasted, that's going to have to be answered by Mr. Engler. Mr. Engler, would you be willing?
Yeah, I can't say exactly. I mean, whatever we can reuse on the site, we'll reuse. You know, either in grading or retaining walls or you know, other subsurface uses. Whatever we're not able to use, we would probably truck off site to other sites that, you know, or other projects that are in the need for stone or whatever the materials that's being removed.
So with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would comment to those 2 answers. 1, this project should not move forward until we have very good answers supported by the town to these 2 questions.
All right. Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Bill Cross, 31 Smiths Point Road. Thank you, Selectmen, for all the work you're putting into the assessment of this project. In addition to 5 hardworking selectmen, we have lots of other talented volunteers in our town. We've spoken a bit about the RKG report, which I found disappointing. I thought it was more a hasty benediction than it was an independent analysis. We have, on the other hand, great talent in our FinCom. And I wanted to understand how you're expecting to work with FinCom to get their thorough and independent review of this important matter so that you can benefit from their input.
So I know the FinCom has already begun to work over that data. I expect that they will continue to do so over the next few weeks and provide us their own independent opinions regarding it. Don't know what else I can tell you right now.
So you've tasked them to do a more thorough analysis on an independent kind of ground up basis.
On an independent ground up kind of basis, we task them to evaluate the fiscal impact calculations that were made and present us with their opinion. Didn't tell them how to do it, asked them to do it according to their, however they felt appropriate.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, with all due respect to FinCom, that's a volunteer board made up of many of which are not financial professionals. The board retained RKG, which is one of the premier fiscal impact consultants in the Commonwealth that do nothing but this. And they've opined on the analysis that's been done. And as far as we're concerned, I mean, the board can entertain any additional analysis they want, but if the FinCom comes out with a rip job about how negatively impactful this project is, we're not going to give it a lot of credibility, nor are we going to change, you know, the plans or what we're talking about with this board, just to be candid.
Well, I appreciate the candor. However, from a political standpoint, I think you can appreciate that there are people who do look to receive some measure of input from the professionals who live in the town and may have opinions on the matter. And we have stated from the outset to our residents that we will be consulting with our FinCom, and that's what we're going to do. And I understand your position on it, but we have to get as much counsel as we can along the way to convince ourselves and convince our residents that we've looked at as many views on the data as we possibly can. All right.
Eli, this is Christine. I had difficulty unmuting earlier. I'll be very brief if you would allow.
I will, and this is the
Thank
last.
you. No problem. Just for the future meetings, it sounds like you are under a time crunch here, but if it's unfeasible to post what you're reading from, is it able to at least share on the screen so we can follow along more readily? Sometimes there's blurbs and connection issues and we just can't always follow what you're saying. That was my first just comment. And the second comment was the MassWorks grant. Is there any match that Manchester would be responsible for? Just high level. That's it. Thank you.
Greg, you got a response to that right now?
So no, there's not a required match. You are required to present typically, if not 100%, near 100% construction document. So you would need to engineer the project and have those cost estimates pretty nailed down as part of your application. So obviously there's a cost in developing those plans. It sounds like Mr. Engler is offering that his team could do that.
Eli, if I may.
Yes, Becky.
Sarah Melish has her hand up and she said it's in regarding FinCom comment.
All right, Sarah, I will take your comment.
Thank you, Eli. The Finance Committee, I believe, is going to meet on February 17th to review the peer financial analysis. We do have some concerns, and we hope to present some recommendations to the Board of Selectmen after that meeting. Thank you.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is to go over some of the items where we decided that there was data that was going to be needed from SLV and vice versa, and schedule a time when we can meet again for another round of this and hopefully cover into the environmental and the traffic and some of the other items, depending on how time allows. Mr. Engler, you were going to, oops.
Mr. Chairman, let me try to make your job easier and tell you what I think you're asking for, and you can tell me if I missed anything. I'm going to provide to you the financial valuation to move one affordable unit from 80 to 60. I'm going to provide a valuation to move a traditional affordable unit to, or a market unit to a traditional affordable unit. So I'll give you two different valuations. I am going to I'm going to give, which I know I already have, the current unit mix at 157 units, broken down by, one bedroom plus, 2 bedroom. So everybody can see the unit mix as currently constituted, which would have impact on the proportionality discussion, because everybody should know what the percentages are now. So if a reduction was effectuated, we know proportionately. And then I need to, I think I'm going to play around, is not the right word, but look at some various scenarios of a 3-story building, or maybe a reduced 4-story, taking off some of the sections that are most visible from School Street. So some, schematic exercises, if you will, architecturally. And then to think a little bit more concretely about how or if footnote 1 and 2 translate to either density reduction or financial mitigation, or both. That one's a little bit more challenging and will take a little bit more work. But in other words, if you get a grant of $1 million or more, it would mean this to the building, or it would mean this amount of mitigation. I need to be more concrete, because I know the board needs to understand, what are the terms of the deal. So I will be prepared to have, shall we say, a more specific proposal for the Board of Selectmen, having had the benefit of our discussion tonight. So those are my to-do lists as I've captured them. It's quite possible I may have missed something, but hopefully those are the important ones.
Okay, and you were also going to look to see if your people knew if multiple MassWorks grants could be pending at the same time.
Yep.
Eli?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Just one comment, Mr. Engler, on the breakdown, including 1+ bedrooms.
Yep.
Can you also include the expected rent from that 1+ bedroom? And I don't know whether it's possible or not, based on your experience and all the projects that you've done, to give us some idea of the range of rents as they go up and down based on location in the building and view, those things, that elevator shafts, things like that, that either increase or decrease.
That one I'm not going to be able to do. I mean, it's just too, that's part art, part science, and different across different buildings and not consistent among different projects for different reasons. I mean, I have a lot on my plate. I don't think that's respectfully, the best use of my time. I would rather focus more on the proposals and more of the specifics and the architecture and density and those things. I'm not sure really, I could give you some some guidance on differentials between one plus and ones, but, once again, those decisions honestly are not made until the building is like 6 months away from occupancy, because a lot of things change and happen and stuff. So I'm not really sure what you're trying to glean from that information, as opposed to me just saying the average market rate rent will be $3 a square foot. Could be $280 in some units, could be $320. To me, that should be enough. So, but maybe I'm missing something.
I assumed that you had some calculations that you had already done in that regard to come up with the average square foot or the average monthly rent that you're going to charge, which is the basis for what's an affordable apartment at 80%.
Well, no, the affordable is, I can do that very easily. I mean, we'll give you what those affordable rents are. That's not a problem. And on the market rate side, yeah, we can tell you what we think the average market rate rent will be on a square foot basis. And then you can extrapolate that out. Although I will tell you, traditionally, not always, smaller units have a higher per square foot rent than larger units, just because on a gross basis,
sure,
you start to get into big numbers if you apply a universal rent across all unit types. The affordable unit rent, I'll add that to my list. That's an easy one. And we'll give you our market rate. Let me think about it, and we'll give you something, and hopefully, that'll satisfy you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So from our side, we're going to go back and we're going to discuss again our conditions, given the information you've given us, and see if we can develop some responses for you. Now, we haven't gone through the environmental and the traffic side. And a couple of those responses you still are considering your response. If you have any specific information that you need from the town that's not like an opinion based from the board, please let us know, and we'll get that to you. And likewise, as we read your responses for those items, if we have any informational requests ahead of our next meeting, we will try to fire those off to you in as timely a manner as possible. All right, so unless there's any other further comments or questions or staging about what we each have to do, I'd like to talk about scheduling a next meeting.
Mr. Chairman, just one question, because my son walked in the room. I don't think there's anything I'm waiting on the town for. I mean, obviously your responses to what I submitted, but a couple of the things that are outstanding, those are being worked on by my team. We're not waiting for some information. So just for clarity, I'm not waiting on anything. And honestly, I think the environmental and traffic stuff is worth, certainly worth talking about. There's some important details, but I think we got through a lot tonight, because I think we would all agree that the big ones are, is density and mitigation. So I think we've made some successful progress tonight. So, anyway, sorry for that digression.
No, that's okay. So I'm going to propose that we go off on our separate ways. The board has a fair bit of budget-related work to do over the next little bit of time here, so I think we should come back in another couple of weeks and have a conversation. February 11th is a Thursday.
I'm calling that answered prayers.
We can do that, or we can do February 18th.
Is this meeting with Mr. Engler again? Is that what you're
They are pretty much all going to be that way. Yep. Mr. Angler, the list of things that you're going to be looking into, do you feel like February 11th is reasonable for you to chew through them, get us the information, and then have us some less pressurized time to think about it? Or do you want to go to the 18th? What's your preference?
No, I think the 11th is achievable.
All right.
I'm not going to wait, Mr. Chairman. Some of this stuff I might submit tomorrow, or the end of the week. I'm not going to submit the whole package at once. I'll submit it to Greg as we have it.
Yeah. All right, so we'll be planning on another meeting just like this one on February 11th at 6:30. And just confirming that's a Thursday, I haven't screwed it up, right? February 11th, 2021 is a Thursday. Yep. Sarah Malish, you are going to have FinCom back on a Wednesday schedule by then. Besides your meeting the next weekend anyway.
Right, we have ZBA on the 17th, so FinCom's on the 18th. We're good for FinCom on the 10th.
Okay.
Sorry, things are complicated.
All right. Yeah, it's a busy time. Any other comments or questions from the board? All right. In that case, I would certainly entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
By Becky, and I'll call it seconded by John. Roll call vote, Mr. Round,
Yes.
Bodmer Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Harrison,
Yes.
Ms. Jakes,
Yes.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Yes. Good night, everybody, and good night, Mr. Angler.
Thank you.
Whitten,
Have a nice evening. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Bye.
all.
Thank you.